Genuine choke. Slurp-de-diddly-doo, my little chocolate chicken McFly potato chips. How are you all this wonderful Sunday morning? We've got a quick little verse, and then we're going to jump straight into the tutorial from Amos chapter 2. The Lord says, "The people of Moab have sinned again and again, and I will not forget it. I will not leave them unpunished anymore. For they desecrated the tombs of the kings of Edom with no respect for the dead. Now in return I will send fire upon Moab, and it will destroy all the palaces in Kerioth. Moab shall go down in tumult as the warriors shout and trumpets blare." Shout out Tony Blair. "And I will destroy their king and slay all the leaders under him. The Lord has spoken." So, I'm still getting around to a bunch of your comments on a previous video of the Start Loud, Finish Loud video, which sparked a lot of interest. And there was a lovely comment, and yes, Nanog Ghost Music said, "Thanks for this. I'm on the fence about having my kick in the drum bus. Do you separate it out in the earlier stages to treat it differently and sidechain it properly, then flatten it with all your other drum elements for the mixdown stage? Any perspective is greatly appreciated. Thanks for making killer videos." Thank you. And Mike also says, question is, do you make a drum bus with your projects? So I can answer both in this one video. Little note, when you say flatten it, that scared me a lot when you said that, because that sounds like a bad idea. I don't want to flatten my drums. I want them very dynamic, but I'm not sure exactly what you meant. Yeah, here is how I typically group my drums in my drum and bass tracks. I took my last track as an example, and it was perfect for an example because it sort of follows the formula I tend to use. So this is from my last release called Bronx. I did upload the stems of the whole track on Patreon recently. Shout out to all the Patreon supporters. But anyway, this is how I typically always structure my drum grouping, and it's not very complicated. In fact, it's rather simple and straightforward, and I don't over process my drums at all. I try to use the best samples and then just mix them well, mix them cleanly with one another, and I try not to add too many plugins on top. Anyway, what I end up having is basically I have a bus for all my kicks, because sometimes I have different types of kick drums. In this one there's a few different layers and things to my kicks, but like anything that is to do with the main kick, I got a really sort of almost slightly distorted flavour kind of kick drum in this track. It's a bit different to what I normally use, but that's the kicks. Then I have my snares in a group as well. Kicks and snares are all in a group, in separate groups. Then I've got my cymbals in a separate group. So this is all the high-end splashy hi-hats and rides and things like that. Little shakers and bits, everything that's just high-end really, that doesn't have any mid-range, character so much. And then this is where I have, I can sometimes label this folder as like drum percussions or toms or fills, or sometimes I'll label it breaks. And this is where I have other parts to my drums which have like a distinct mid-range. So parts to the drums that where I need to leave the mid-range in, like if I've got like some breaks in there and I want to keep the the power and the mid-range of the break in it, then I'll put it in there instead of the cymbal group, because the cymbal group I'll tend to EQ it. I'll tend to take like you see here, I tend to low cut quite a bit higher on my cymbals, up to 500 hertz or so, whereas in the break group I would probably I'd like to leave the mid-range in. So that's why I separate them to two different groups really. And then I've actually got another group here which is the intro drums, because I always process my intro drums separately to the rest of the drum arrangement. So even in the build up here, I always process my intro drums and make them a bit weaker than the main drums. So those are the groups, right? So you got your intro drums, These actually don't go into the final drum bus, as I just see here. They go straight to the master because they're not really. They're kind of more of an affected kind of drum group, you know. So I don't always put them into the whole drum bus because they're not like as important to get right, because it's just for the intro, you know. But on the drop where I need the mix down to be perfect, this is where I group all of these now into a master drum bus. So cymbals go into my drum bus, snares go into my drum bus, kicks go in, and breaks go in as well. So I end up with my final drum bus, which has everything. And again, I keep it very clean. I basically mid-side EQ the low end a little bit, so I'm just controlling it's not too stereo in the low end. I don't tend to EQ very often, but this was a last minute mastering kind of mixing and mastering kind of tweak where I just felt like I needed a little bit more, a little bit sort of treble. In the drums, I sort of boosted them around 800, but that's I tend not to EQ the actual drum bus. It was just a subtle kind of tweak. You see, I've done it very, very subtly with the sloping, so it's not going to affect the whole sound too much. And that's literally it. I don't really actually process it anymore. There's a filter on there for an effect when I sort of filter the phrase down at the end of the, towards the outro of the track. That's it. And it's just straight into the clipper. So there's actually no processing on the drums really at all. It's all just done in the sound selection, you know. But what I do have up here is I have a drum layer, which is where I've basically bounced out all of the drums into a break, and then I've convoluted them. So here, this is like my sort of parallel drum layer. So this is where I do, take the drums into that next dimension almost. And all I've done for that is I've basically put on 100% reverb. So convolution. I've gone for the live room, which is a nice small one from the Kilohertz Convolver. Then I've just EQ'd that. Taken out a bit of low end, and then I've run it through some tape as well. So this is making quite a big difference. Gives it some pitch warble and makes it a bit random. So running it through the tape as well as the convolution. Then I actually compress it a bit to make it a bit weaker again. I think a little bit more low end taken out. And then I sort of reverb it a little bit more as well. And so that's my sort of, almost you could imagine like the drum overheads in a sense. So that kind of brings the whole drums into like a bit bigger stereo sound stage. So that's the only sort of post-processing I do on the whole drums. And like you see, I've not done it on the actual drum group. I've made a new layer to create new harmonics to go on top of it all. And that just goes straight to the stereo output here. So that's the whole drum groups like that. And the reason I separate the kicks, obviously, and to answer your question as well, like if I need to sidechain, I can just sidechain things directly from the kick bus, you know, it's no problem. I can just sidechain my basses from the kick bus or something, you know, before it goes into the final group. The sidechain happens before that, you know. I don't flatten the drums or something. I don't know if you're talking about like compressing the drum group or something, but I don't do that. I never compress the whole drum bus. Never. I just clip it to 0. And I also I do compress a couple of things. I compress the anything that's not the primary sound of the drums, like the powerful sounds, like so not the snare, because that needs to be super powerful, not the kick because that needs to be super powerful, but the cymbals, the intro parts, the breaks, because they're kind of like a filler thing. I compress all of those groups. So the cymbals, for example, they're the main thing that I always compress, because cymbals are just a nightmare with their volumes, you know. Especially if you've got loads of different cymbals at the same time, you've got a nightmare in terms of how many volume differences there are across the cymbal group. So that's when I compress them. just to flatten out that's where I'll flatten things out, flatten out the levels, because there's so many different volume levels throughout the cymbals. So that's a great time to flatten something. But for the rest of the drum process, like the kicks and the snares, like I'm not going to flatten those at all. They're going to retain their dynamic power. And as they go into the final drum bus, they will also not be flattened or anything. They will all retain their dynamic power. So yes, that's basically it. Again, you see there's a couple of other processing things I've done on the cymbals, like transient shaping, like a tiny bit softening them, EQing them at various stages, checking the stereo spread, making them a little bit more narrow. Yeah, the snares and the kicks, the things I do are usually just transient shaping, just to control the length of them, like tightening it up and making it a bit shorter there, for example, adding a little high-end reverb. If I add reverb on the drums, it's really just in the high end, so it doesn't phase with the mid-range at all. So make sure you don't add too much reverb in the mid-range, or none if possible. And the transient shaper again on the kick to shorten that. But there's no compression or anything on any of the kicks or snares or the final drum bus. Like I definitely avoid that, because in drum and bass, remember, the kick and the snare are like the powerful part of the mixdown. So it doesn't make any sense to compress those parts. You can compress the weaker elements of the drum group, like the cymbals, the break fills and things like that. They've got a little bit of compression on, and a bit of EQing as well. And yeah, that's pretty much how I do it. So not too complicated. Just sort of, how many groups? 1, 2, 3, 4, sort of 5 groups. One for the intro, that's kind of a separate thing. But on the drop, yeah, cymbals, snares, kicks, and then like the rest of the stuff that has mid-range in, that's not kick and snare, like toms, breaks, that kind of stuff, that goes in one folder. And they all go into the master drum folder, which has not much processing on, just clipping it, making sure all of the volumes and everything are balanced out between the different groups, and then a final little parallel overhead kind of sample I put on everything if I want to add like extra stereo interest and add new harmonics with convolution and tape. That's pretty much it for today, my G's. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a little bit about my process and how I do my drums, and keep it quite clean and simple. I wish you guys a great start to your Sunday. Much love. More from me soon. Take care.